Hello， 大家好，我是 Devin， 又来到我们英文健身影片翻译讨论时间。那首先真的很感谢大家对这个系列影片的支持。那今天影片的灵感来自于 @PBS0083，在我尝试美国健美网红增肌餐那支影片下面的留言。首先非常感谢大家的留言。你在他留言里面提到了基因的影响，那基因算是蛮棘手的议题啦，因为也没办法直接说一个人基因是好或者是不好，基因它影响了非常多的面向，但真的很少有人会是在所有面向上面基因都是占优势。那对于健身来讲，哪些是有利的基因呢？今天就来讨论这个主题。但是在我们开始讨论之前，我想要让大家知道，就是基因这种东西并不是我们能控制。那我自己刚开始健身的时候，有一段时间也很执着于基因。那阵子我看了各种论坛的文章讨论串，那时候 bodybuilding.com 还存在，然后看了各种 YouTube 影片。结果我对自己的结论是我基因不适合健身。我那时候自己给自己下这个结论的时候，的确是有一点挫折。在我开始训练之前，我体重连50公斤都不到，然后增重困难，身体对训练反应不是很敏感，然后骨架又窄又细。但是后来我自己的想法是说，首先肯定有人基因上比我更不厉害，比我更努力。那再来就是有一部分的挫折感是来自于去跟别人比较，就是会羡慕别人有好的基因。但是最后到头来还是自己跟自己比较最有意义。就是下个月的自己有没有比这个月的自己更往理想的目标前进。所以到后面我就越来越不执着基因这部分，反而把精力转向去了解科学化健身。就是我现在手牌是这样子，那我要怎么打才能达到最大的效果？所以我也想要提醒大家，在讨论这个主题的时候，就把它当比较娱乐型的资讯就好。如果很不幸的结果自己不满意自己的基因，所以就不去尝试健身锻炼的话，那就有一点比赛还没开始就结束的这种感觉，有点可惜。那我们就用比较轻松吃瓜的心态来看这支影片吧。
Supposedly, when he was only a teenager, Dorian Yates bench pressed 315 pounds on his first attempt ever at the lift. He later went on to win the greatest competition in all of bodybuilding, the Mr. Olympia, 6 times. When he was only 19, Jake Cutler squatted 700 pounds. He had only been lifting for a few years at the time. He later went on to build some of the greatest legs in history and also win the Mr. Olympia competition 4 times. At 20 years old, Arnold Schwarzenegger had only been training for a few years but had already won the Mr. Universe competition. In addition, while still in his teens, he was an avid powerlifter, having deadlifted over 600 pounds. When he had barely finished with puberty, Schwarzenegger had already built one of the greatest bodies on earth, even when compared to grown men who have been training twice as long.
So why is it that for some individuals, strength and muscle mass and even lower levels of body fat seem to almost come naturally, whereas for others it's significantly more difficult, even going as far as to say impossible? We all know that genetics plays a huge role in what you look like, how tall you are, what your eye color is, your hair color, but you can't actually control those things. However, when it comes to things like muscle mass, you have a direct ability to influence that. But how much of an influence does your genetic makeup have on your ability to put on muscle mass, put on strength, build your physique? So, there was an excellent article published called Variability in Muscle Size and Strength Following Unilateral Training. What the study did is it took 585 test subjects, both a combination of men and women, and it made them undergo a 12-week training program specifically targeted towards their non-dominant bicep. And this is where they start to get weird. After the 12-week training program, which was the exact same for every test subject, the results were different would be an understatement. When it comes to size, the results range from -2% all the way up to 59% improvement in cross-sectional area of the bicep. This means that not only did some individuals see no improvement, they actually lost muscle size, whereas other individuals saw an almost 2/3 improvement in their bicep size just within a 12-week, 3-month period. The term high responders to training is an understatement in this case. However, it gets even crazier. When we're looking specifically at strength, the results were ridiculous. We had some individuals having 0% gain in strength, meaning that after 12 weeks, the weight they were able to lift for their 1 rep max was the exact same as when they started. On the other hand, we had some individuals going as high as 250% improvement in strength.
我当初就觉得自己是属于身体对于训练反应不敏感的体质。 但现在回过头来看，可能的确我身体对训练反应没有敏感到可以一下子从竹竿人变成美国队长。但是当时造成我有这样的想法，主要还是来自于第一个，我对训练架构的理解不是很完整。这里不是指说在健身房里面做这个动作的时候，肩膀要怎么摆，手肘要怎么挤，要怎么夹才是正确的动作，是比较偏向怎么去应用渐进式超负荷的概念，比较偏向怎么去了解运动量、训练量跟疲劳度的控制这些的。当我慢慢的一个一个把这些概念融入到我的训练里面之后，就有开始观察到肌肉对于训练的反应呈现在数字上面。再来就是我当初耐心有点不太够，就是1个月2个月没有看到一些结果，就想要去尝试新的东西，就想要去换课表，没有意识到健身的成长跟进步比较像马拉松而不是冲刺。反而是当我不去在意结果，就日复一日去执行每天的训练计划之后，才突然感受到进步。所以我自己的体验是真的在健身的时候有一定的程度是会需要盲目的去相信这个过程，就是 trust the process, right?
Why does this happen? What factors are actually at play on a physiological level which lead to such drastic variation between individuals? So there are two fantastic articles which directly correlate to what we are talking about here. First is a scientific article titled
Potent Myofiber Hypertrophy During Resistance Training in Humans Associated with Satellite Cell-Mediated Myonuclear Addition, a Cluster Analysis.
Now, this can kind of get weird, and it's almost like we're not even talking in the same language anymore. However, another excellent article breaks this down for us. This one is by Brett Contreras, who, by the way, is an excellent source in the world of training and hypertrophy. Quote, the difference between excellent responders in comparison to average and non-responders in strength training was mostly due to satellite cell activation. Satellite cells are essentially muscle cell precursors which surround the muscle cell or myofiber, and they can essentially break themselves down and donate their parts, otherwise known as nuclei, in order to facilitate growth of the target muscle cell. Individuals who have been found to have increased numbers of these satellite cells or a heightened ability to increase the numbers of these satellite cells on demand during resistance training, they were found to have higher levels of responsiveness to resistance training and thus facilitate additional muscle growth. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, the low responders to resistance training, they were found to not only have lower numbers of these satellite cells, but when they underwent a resistance training program, these numbers didn't increase. Okay guys, so what about body fat? Because maybe muscle mass and strength isn't your #1 priority. You don't want to get big, you just want to get damn shredded. Well, that's pretty weird too. There was an excellent study called the long-term response of overfeeding in identical twins. What they did in the study is they took 12 pairs of identical twins and it overfed them by 1,000 calories on a daily basis. So average weight gain at the end of the 12 weeks was 8.1 kilograms. However, the results varied from 4.3 kilograms all the way to 13.3. So you overeat by 1,000 calories worth of additional food. I do the exact same thing. You put on 3 times the amount of weight. What? But here's where the twin part came in. Because when analyzing how much weight the individuals gain, the level of variability, the level of difference was 3 times higher between pairs as opposed to within pairs, directly indicating that due to the genetic similarity between identical twins, they gain or lose weight similarly as opposed to other individuals, despite, once again, everybody in this experiment overeating by the exact same amount. Once we look beyond the numbers, look beyond how much, raw pound for pound weight an individual gained, and we start looking at where that body fat went, the regional distribution of body fat, now the level of variability between pairs as opposed to within pairs is 6-1. So it seems that when it comes to putting on fat, it's pretty different. Now, when it comes to putting on fat and where that fat actually went, whether it be on your stomach, whether it goes on, your lower back, your love handles, on your legs, even on your face, that is drastically different. Next up, guys, skeletal structure. This one is very important. Muscle and fat is something which is almost secondary in terms of your physique. It sits on your skeletal structure. You can get more muscle, you can get less fat, but at the end of the day, the actual framework for where all of this stuff sits on your body is your bones, and you can't really change that. A great example of this, and one of the reasons why this may be extremely important to all the guys watching this, there was a study, or actually a poll done, where they asked women, what is the most attractive physical feature of a man? And although abs, arms, chest, everything was on this list, at the end of the day, what came out as #1 was overall V-taper, which is directly correlated to the actual width of your clavicles. So the clavicles are a bone which kind of sits right here between your neck and your shoulder, and the distance of that clavicle, essentially the actual width of your shoulders, is going to give you a much more pronounced V-taper. Pretty much, you know that Superman superhero look? Yeah, that. Another thing directly correlated to overall V-taper is the width of your waist, specifically the width of your pelvis. There are always going to be individuals who seem to have almost these tiny 28-inch waists, and a big reason behind that is due to the actual bone structure, whereas another individual who has a much wider pelvis, they may be unfortunate, these are the guys who are like 6 feet tall, yet they have like a 35-inch waist. And unfortunately, no matter how much fat you trim away, eventually, once all the fat is gone, you're still down to your actual pelvis, and unless you sit there filing away at that, there's nothing you can do about it. There's still so much you can do for it. For example, in the case of your shoulder width, if you have naturally, slightly shorter clavicles, if you spend a considerable amount of time working on your deltoids, particularly your lateral deltoids, great exercises to target this would be anything like lateral dumbbell raises or lateral cable raises. Doing this is going to build up your lateral deltoids, which will add about an inch or two on either side of your shoulders, thus giving you that wider V-taper physique that you are looking for. And in the case of waist structure, most individuals actually won't even have an issue with this because they're not at such a low body fat percentage to the point where their pelvis is the limiting factor in terms of their waist thickness. You can absolutely work on decreasing the overall thickness and size of your waist simply by losing a few pounds, especially around the abdominal area.
他这边说减少腹部的脂肪对于降低腰围有很大的帮助。但是有在看健身资讯的人应该都知道，就是目前的共识是没办法局部减脂这件事情。因为你可以理解，就是皮肤是一个器官，皮脂层是一个器官，那就像是肝硬化，你不能选择它先硬左边还是先硬右边。降低皮脂层的脂肪，你也不能选择先从哪里开始烧。但是最近应该是在2023年左右的时候，有一份论文出来，指向有可能是可以局部减脂，当然这只是一篇研究而已，所以还没办法很下定论。但是这个实验我觉得设计也是还不错，但是至少它在学术界里面开启了这个讨论，所以可能在未来几年之内，我们可以看到一些操作是有办法帮助我们去局部减脂，可以期待一下。然后刚刚他提到骨架部分，这真的就是我没办法控制的弱项了。我锁骨就不是很宽。再来就是我骨头蛮细，骨架的粗细跟它上面能承载的肌肉量是在统计上面有一个正相关的关系。像是我手腕就非常的细，我可以用小指把它给扣住。讲好听一点，就是我骨架是偏精致的，但是这个没办法就是没办法，所以也不要太执着。
Next up, height. This one, there isn't much science specifically behind it. However, this is something which I've always noticed, and maybe you guys have too. When you look around, especially in the gym, notice that usually taller individuals, we're talking like, 6 feet and well above, it's very rare for them to be very muscular. But on the other hand, when you're in the gym and you see individuals who have a lot of very thick muscle mass, they're almost these kind of stocky individuals. They kind of look like bodybuilders. They're usually somewhat shorter individuals. And a fantastic example of this is the Mr. Olympia competition. Pretty much the Super Bowl of bodybuilding. And after almost 50 years and having 13 different Mr. Olympia champions, only one in the history of the whole competition has ever been over 6 feet tall, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And the final point in regards to your skeletal frame and overall bone structure is an interesting point. This comes from Casey Butt's frame size model.
果然他有提到骨头粗度这件事情，我刚刚去拿这个量尺嘛，量一下我手腕到底有多细。16公分，但是我没有去比较过平均大概都是多少，但是大家可以自己量量看自己手腕，跟我比一下，我应该是偏细的啦。
That you guys can actually try this at home. There is an online calculator based on this model. I'll leave a link for it down in the description box below. When I put in my numbers, the maximum weight that I could have, the maximum muscular body weight I could have at approximately 10% body fat would be 203 pounds. If we took my same ankle and wrist measurements but increase them just 1 inch, suddenly at keeping height and body fat percentage the same, the biggest muscular body weight I could have is almost 216 pounds, meaning that just changing your actual bone thickness, your bone structure, increased the most amount of muscle I can gain by 13 pounds, which is a drastic amount of muscle. Okay, so we've talked about muscle mass, body fat, bone structure, all of these things, these big things that happen in your body. But what dictates all of these things? At the end of the day, there are certain signals which actually go towards your body fat, towards your muscle mass, towards everything, and tell them what to do. And that is, of course, hormones. And these are not the same for all individuals. The most important anabolic hormone in both men and women, testosterone. This is one of the main reasons why steroids are simply synthetic derivatives of the natural male hormone testosterone. But the weird thing is that even taking steroids aside and focusing specifically on, the average healthy natural testosterone range, even so, there are individuals who may have 2 or even 2.5 times more natural testosterone than another individual. Simply put, it's almost, like for all intents and purposes, that individual compared to the other one, it's almost like they're on natural steroids.
这也是为什么睡眠是属于健身金三角之一的原因。除了提供肌肉细胞修复成长的环境之外，良好的睡眠对于优化自己血清雄性激素浓度来讲也是非常重要的。
Guys, before I close out this video, there are 3 rules I want you to understand. Number 1, there are always going to be people who work half as hard, yet look twice as good as you. Number 2, there are always going to be people who work twice as hard as you, yet they look half as good. And number 3 is shut the hell up. Get over it. Guys, life isn't a carnival of rainbows and sunshine and daisies and 22-inch biceps for everyone. That's simply not gonna happen. If you want to be Mr. Olympia, chances are 99.99% of you don't have the genetics for it. Does it suck? Yeah, but I figured that out a long time ago, and you know what? It doesn't really matter. Don't look at someone else. Don't compare yourself to someone else. The only person you should ever be comparing yourself to is the only person who has the exact same genetic component as you. So, if you have an identical twin, great, that's an option. But most of us don't have that, so we have to compare ourselves to ourselves.
好的，他这支影片到这边为止，我觉得他最后讲的还不错，而且就我观察，的确就是基因不好但是有在训练的人，往往是可以把自己锻炼到比基因好可是没有在训练的人更壮、力量更大的一个程度。而且说实在，比如说打电动好了，往往是通关难易度高的关卡会比通关难易度简单的关卡来得更有成就感嘛。所以无论如何，只要是有信念的坚持练下去，总是会看到结果的。那今天的影片就先到这边，如果大家觉得有趣有帮助的话，欢迎帮我按赞，然后按订阅，我们就下支影片见。大家记得多运动，然后多喝水，拜拜。